I wanted to do. So I'm going to get on and introduce you to our guest this evening. We are delighted to introduce Professor Martin Marshall to you this evening. He's a GP in Newham in East London, and you will probably mostly recognise him as the current chair of the RCGP. But there's a lot more to him than you realise. He's also a professor of health improvement at UCL. He's a programme director at UCL Partners. He's worked in the Improvement Science London as a lead. And previously, he's held the dizzy responsibility of the Deputy Chief Medical Officer and Director General to the Department of Health and Director of Research and Development at the Health Foundation. Quite frankly, there's so much that he's done. There's a lot we can talk about this evening. He's even been awarded a CBE for services to health back in 2005. So I'm absolutely delighted that he's here with us this evening. Martin, thank you for coming.
It's a real pleasure. Hi to everybody. Great to see you. Thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, so it's lovely to see on the chat people have been introducing themselves. Martin, my first question is really one of the kind of things behind Next Generation GP is that we get this opportunity to meet people like you, and those kind of CVs sound quite frightening to those of us at the beginning of our career, and something that's really useful is hearing your sort of personal story and your personal tour of your leadership journey to date. I wonder if you could share some of that with us.
Yeah, of course. And my CV isn't that frightening, actually. My friends say it's a manifestation of attention deficit disorder rather than anything else. I have done quite a lot in my career, and maybe that will become kind of clear why as I talk. So where do you want me to start, Julia? From the beginning, very beginning?
At the very beginning.
At the very beginning. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm one of 5 kids, fourth of 5 kids from an Irish Roman Catholic family. So I learned at a very young age to get my voice heard, I guess, because otherwise I'd starve or get beaten up by my siblings or whatever. So I guess from a kind of young age, I was always very gregarious. I enjoyed playing around with people and messing around. I guess I probably had some kind of leadership propensity from the earliest age without really knowing about it, in so much as, school prefect and captain of sports teams and patrol leader in the scouts and that kind of stuff. I seem to find myself into leadership positions early on in my life, and maybe that, I don't know whether that's a manifestation of what you might do later in your life. I have no idea. I don't know about that. Went to a kind of boys' grammar school, I guess. Good school. Mostly played rugby. Don't remember doing very much work, but I remember practicing scrummaging up against the blackboard in history lessons. That was kind of what we did at school. It's Christian Brothers School, and I didn't come from a medical family at all. But I guess my main driver at school was a love of biology. I used to love biology. I used to dissect animals that I found in the garden and things like that. So I kind of really love biology. And I think I met a local GP when I was about 14 or 15 looking for kind of work placements. And I thought, this sounds really interesting and I quite like to do medicine. So I applied. I got a really good offer. In those days, it was 3 Cs from several medical schools, and I didn't get 3 Cs. I think the reason for that is our school went co-ed in my final year, and I discovered girls, and that kind of put me off my exams. I think that's the reason. But I didn't actually get good enough grades to get in first time round. So I went back to school and retook 2 of my A levels, and then got the right grades, and then went to medical school in London. So I think I probably would classify myself as a kind of late developer, if you like. Medical school in London, had a great time, really good school, Westminster Charing Cross, which is now Imperial. I enjoyed every specialty that I did at medical school. So I used to really irritate my then girlfriend, now my wife, by saying I definitely wanted to be a paediatrician one week, and then I definitely wanted to be a psychiatrist the next, and definitely wanted to be a physician the next. And it was probably, I was saying to Julia that in my 4th year, we didn't do very much general practice, I have to say, at London Medical School, but I had a 2-week or 3-week attachment in an amazing general practice in Marlborough in Wiltshire. And it was the most inspirational thing I've ever done. And it just made me realise that general practice was, as far as I was concerned, where medicine was practiced. It was just such a brilliant place to be. So I went straight from my house jobs in London to a vocational training scheme down in Exeter, which is a very kind of psychodynamic orientated. We weren't allowed to talk about any diseases at all. It was all about kind of relationships and how you utilize relationships in order to be a good clinician. I think I've never thought that any other career in medicine would have been a good thing for me, and I think there's probably three reasons for that. One of them is because I've got a short attention span and I love doing everything. I didn't really want to give up anything. One of them is I really don't like hospital environments. I don't like hierarchies. I don't like environments that constrain you. And I've always enjoyed a level of autonomy. And of course, the level of autonomy across any branch of medicine is less than it used to be, but it's still relative to other specialties. I talk to my colleagues who work in hospitals, often in very managed environments, and I'm really pleased that I work in general practice. And then I guess the third reason is I'm just really fascinated by people. They've always interested me. I'm much more interested in how people respond to illness and health and well-being than I am by whatever the illness might be. So I guess those are the reasons that I went into general practice. When I finished my vocational training scheme, I was offered a part-time partnership in the practice that I was working in Exeter as a trainee, and it was a really good practice, and it was with a view to becoming a full-time partner a couple of years later when the senior partner retired. So I took it on and expected to be a full-time GP in Devon with 6 kids and a Volvo and a couple of Labradors and kind of a bit of sailing and that kind of stuff, the kind of stuff that Devon GPs do. And I thought that's what I wanted to do. But by accident, and serendipity played a big part in my career, by accident, because I was looking around for something to do with the rest of my time when I became a partner, I did a few things. I did a few locums. I did a bit of writing, a bit of journalism. But then I accidentally fell into a research job, and I found I really enjoyed it. It was a social science research job. As a student, I'd done a bachelor's in immunology at UCL, actually, where I am now, and I'd enjoyed it. But I did a big laboratory research project, and I thought it was terrible. I thought it was so boring, and I never wanted to do research again. But when I discovered social science research, I really enjoyed it. And so I decided not to become a full-time partner and gradually kind of built a research career. I did a master's degree in Exeter, then did a doctorate back in London, and gradually built a research career alongside being a partner in Exeter. And it was really good. I didn't have big plans particularly. I wasn't very, very ambitious. I just knew that I was really enjoying the intellectual challenge of doing research and the privilege of being paid to think alongside the privilege of being a clinician, and the two together just felt like they molded really well. I really, really enjoyed them. So that was kind of my career, mostly a partner in a really good practice in Exeter, probably a third or 2.5 of my time doing research. And then I guess after probably 10 years as a partner, I reached a kind of point where I thought, if I want to progress my academic career, I'm going to have to put more time into it, and probably going to have to leave Exeter.
Finish the 2-year academic course they need on the job,
which at the time was a very small university without a great kind of career pathway for academic GPs. So I agonized for several years about whether I wanted to essentially give up my practice and mostly become an academic. And it was a really tough decision because I love being a GP, I love being a partner, I love Devon. And then I managed to get a fellowship. Have you heard of a Hartness Fellowship? Have any of you heard of Hartness Fellowships? Something you should really look out for. It's the most amazing health policy exchange, essentially, where you go. It's run and funded by an organisation called the Commonwealth Fund of New York, which is a charity, a foundation. And they give you an opportunity to spend a year in the States, living in the States, based usually in an academic or policy institute, basically having a good time, meeting interesting people. And I applied for that. I managed to get that. So I went out for the States for a year with my wife. and really enjoyed the work, and discovered that I probably wasn't going to miss being a partner as much as I thought I was, because I didn't do any clinical practice out there. So when I came back, I immediately resigned my partnership and moved up to Manchester, where the National Primary Care Research and Development Centre was based, probably the best research centre, certainly policy research centre in the country at the time. And I was, after a year, I think I was appointed as a professor, and worked in Manchester for about 8 years as doing policy related research and just a little bit of clinical practice, just a day a week of clinical practice in Moss Side, which is, any of you from Moss Side? Moss Side's a great place, most amazing place. It's quite posh now, but in the late 90s when I was there, it wasn't very posh. It was, I remember being told, when you do a home visit, don't stop at traffic lights because someone will nick your wheels. It was one of those kind of places. It was quite a rough old place, but now it's a bit posher. So I did general practice there, and that shift from kind of semi-rural general practice in Devon to inner city general practice in Moss Side was quite a challenge. So I did that for about 8 years, and then was looking for new challenges. Really enjoyed policy work, and almost accidentally got invited to apply for this Deputy Chief Medical Officer's job with Liam Dollison, who was then CMO. I'd done some work with Liam, some research work with Liam previously, and he wanted to have a GP as one of his deputies. And he wanted an academic GP as well. So I applied and I got that post. And that was a really interesting experience, never to be repeated. I think it's probably fair to say. So in your careers, you'll do some jobs which I don't think you should ever regret doing, because you learn so much. But it was a really tough job, and I discovered that whilst I love working with policymakers and I love working with government, I didn't enjoy working in it. It's a very unusual environment, and the skills that you're required to work in it are, I think, an unusual set of skills. I mean, there are some people who do it really well. There's a lot of people who, I think, rather sell their soul when they work in government. I think it's a very difficult job to do, and I just discovered I probably didn't have the right set of skills to be able to do it. So I did it for 2 years. As I say, learned an awful lot and enjoyed it, but I was glad to get out of the environment. And then moved to the Health Foundation, where I was medical director. Health Foundation's a charitable foundation doing quality improvement work. So medical director, setting up a new R&D program at the Health Foundation, which I did for 4 years. And then I moved to UCL, back into academia, but a very applied kind of form of academia. Maybe we'll come back to that, Julia. So my interest is how you use research to make a difference on the ground. I'm not interested in knowledge for the sake of knowledge. So I've been Professor of Healthcare Improvement at UCL since about 2012. And alongside all of that, I've always been involved in the college in one way or another. So there you go. That wasn't a very much of a thumbnail sketch, was it? But that's kind of
no. But what it offers is an insight into the variety of things that you've covered in your career, Martin. And also, I think for some of us listening, the kind of idea of a portfolio career is perhaps a little bit more sort of set out these days. Whereas in the opportunities that you're talking about, there's sort of, you talked about serendipity, and I've heard Nish say on one of the Next Gen podcasts that luck is where opportunity and preparation come together. And I love that idea that it's about looking for opportunities, being prepared, but also the opportunities arising. And it sounds like some of that, particularly, taking a fellowship in the States, and it's quite nice to hear. I think that there's a difference. You kind of you had in your mind what you thought you were going to do, but actually now down the track you reflect that it's not the Volvo and the well, it might be a Volvo and a dog, but it's not rural. It's not in Devon. It's been quite a variety. So
that's right. And I think it's that willingness to kind of seize opportunities when they come your way, and to take risks, and kind of cope with those risks. And that your ability to do that is partly based on your personality, it's partly based on your circumstance, whether if you're married or not married, whether you've got kids or not kids. There's lots of things that impact on it, but I think that willingness to take risks is what opens doors.
Yeah, and I think that's something in Next Generation GP we're trying to equip people with, the kind of the confidence that it can be done. And we sort of go through things like our strengths finder to find out what we're good at and what we can play stronger in various opportunities that arise. I guess you're right. I do want to go down the academic kind of route a little bit more, because I know there'll be people listening who are considering a career in academia, or perhaps haven't and perhaps should because of the opportunities. I mean, the variety of the kind of research that you've done and the opportunities is quite mind-boggling. But I guess there's also, at the end of the day, we're trained as GPs, and one of the questions I've had is, how have you blended that clinical work with your academic work, and what have you enjoyed the most along the way?
Yeah, okay. So it's a really interesting question, an important question. So I was fortunate that by happenstance, I did a lot of clinical work early in my career. So for the first probably 12 years of my career, I was no less than 3/4 time as a clinician. And I'm pleased that it happened that way, because I think, particularly in general practice, probably more than any other medical specialty, that ability to build the kind of the practical wisdom that comes along with being on the ground, with seeing patients, with learning about patients, learning about the human condition, with making mistakes, but hopefully not too many. It's that kind of learning environment, which I think is really important. So actually, since 2000, I've done no more than a day a week of clinical work. So I haven't got a good balance. And in fact, as I approach kind of the end of my career, the latter part of my career, I want to actually go back and do more clinical work, because I've always enjoyed it. But I've not done more than a day a week of clinical work for 20 years now, pretty much 20 years. And that's a shame in some ways, but you can't do everything. So an academic career is quite different from general practice, particularly if you want to reach the top of the academic tree. Unlike many careers that you might take up in medicine, there's a clear set of rules to the game that you've got to play if you want to be a leading academic. So you've got to do the higher degrees. You've got to publish, and you've got to publish in good journals. Not necessarily that many, but you've got to publish in good journals, because that's the currency that's used. You've got to be able to bring in grants, and you've got to have doctoral students or master students or whatever. You've got to have students, look after students. So there's kind of those three criteria that if you want to be a serious career-based researcher, you've got to fulfill them. If you want to be a kind of part-time researcher alongside clinical practice, you haven't necessarily got to do that. I've got lots of colleagues who are really good researchers. Maybe they have done a PhD in the past, but they're mostly clinicians. And they don't worry about any of the ref criteria in universities. They publish because they enjoy publishing, not because they have to. They'll do whatever research they can, sometimes unfunded. So they've got a love of research and a spirit of inquiry, if you like, rather than want to climb the tree. But if you want to climb the tree, there's rules, and you have to kind of fulfill them.
There's been a question on the chat actually asking what the fellowship in the States was, and Will's answered that. But Will's also asked, he's wondering what the impact was on your family of moving them from obviously the UK to America and then to Manchester, and he's sort of wondering how was that for you?
Yeah, so it's a big question. So we don't have kids, so that made it a lot easier. Although there's for each cohort of Hartness Fellows, we had 5 of us from the UK. In my bunch and in subsequent bunches, there's been people who have had 3 or 4 kids and have just taken them with them. So you can do it if you want to. It depends on how old your kids are, depends how mobile your kids are, but you can do it. It would be very tough to do it without your partner, I think. And my wife managed to get, I was out there for a year, my wife managed to get probably about 9 months off, a combination of begging her employer and unpaid leave and a bit of holiday and all that kind of stuff. So she was out with me for 9 months, and it was such an amazing experience for both of us in our relationship to be in a new environment. We lived on the beach in Santa Monica. I worked at the RAND Corporation, which is one of the leading health policy think tanks in the world. I used to run into work along the beach. Used to swim every lunchtime and every evening. It was the most incredible experience. And they give you a big travel grant so you can travel around the country meeting interesting people. And that, I think it's more than anything, that's what the fellowship was about, actually. I think we develop as individuals by interacting with people who are interesting.
Yeah, and building that network.
Yeah, building the network. Often people who are brighter than us will have more experience than us, and you kind of learn from them. And the Heartless Fellowship was a year of concentrated exposure to really bright people who've done so much thinking, and it can't help but rub off on you. And I certainly wouldn't have done what I've done in the rest of my career without that year. That was the most influential experience in my career, for sure.
So I'm hearing we should seize opportunities and think outside the box and be courageous about opportunities as they come up.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm aware that I can't hog you on all evening, so I'm going to say to people, let's start thinking about the questions that you'd like to ask Martin. But Martin, I'm not sure if you know this, but back in November 2020, we had Helen Stokes-Lampard on one of these evening webinars, and she spoke quite a lot about her experience of chair of the college, which is obviously the position you currently hold.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to read you a quote from the evening. She said, "I feel sorry for Martin. He isn't doing the job he signed up for. It wasn't meant to be like this for him." And it came across with real compassion as we were discussing the college roles and how the chair interacts, and how the last 12 months must have been quite different from what you were expecting as you stepped up. I know you'd been part of the college for, as you say, for many years, but I wonder if you could give us an insight to the challenges, both organisational, political, that you have had and the college have had over the last 12 months.
Well, it's very kind of Helen to feel sorry for me, but don't feel sorry for me, mostly because sympathy doesn't help. There are certain things that, being chair during the biggest international crisis that we've had for 70 years, there are certain things that you don't do, it's a shame that you can't do them. So traveling around the country, meeting interesting people, some of the kind of perks of the job, the dinners, the travel abroad, the jobs like that, you just don't get. I spent almost the whole of the last year, with only a handful of exceptions, here in my office in Chiswick, and that's pretty dull for somebody who's gregarious and likes going out and meeting people and touching flesh and all the rest. So that's a shame. But what an amazing opportunity! How many leaders get an opportunity to lead in crisis, to develop their leadership skills when some people are at their most receptive to being led and some people are at their least receptive to being led, to operating in an environment which is actually at times really inspiring and at times really quite toxic. The social media environment, the level of kind of anger and upset that's out there across the whole of society, but in the medical profession as well, for understandable reasons, is very high. So the kind of opportunities that I've had to exercise my leadership skills at the edge have been really fascinating. So I've actually, most of the time I've enjoyed that. It's been really tough. It's been pretty relentless. And some of it's been more interesting and more enjoyable than other bits of it. And I'd love to have, where am I? I'm about 15, 16 months through the 3-year role. I'd really like to have my last year or so normal, whatever that means, doing other stuff. But I don't have any regrets for what I've done, because I think I think it's been really interesting.
Yeah, it's obviously given a challenge, and the college has risen to that, hasn't it, with providing us with loads of resources and moving onto the online platform.
Yeah, I hope so, and making tough decisions along the way, which you never know how good you are as a leader until you test your leadership skills in the heat of battle. And almost every day during a crisis you are tested. So should we or should we not have supported the delayed second dose of the vaccine? How much fuss should we have made about the availability of PPE at the beginning of the crisis? Should general practice have played a major role in the vaccination rollout or not? Given that general practice has never been busier, how could you possibly create capacity to do it? All of those questions were questions that I and we as a leadership team thought about and struggled with and made with our fingers crossed behind our backs, because we had no idea whether they were going to be the right ones or not. And I'm quite sure that we have made some decisions that have been errors in retrospect. But I think most of the time as a team, we've made, I think, pretty good decisions which have worked out okay. And that, inevitably that makes you feel good.
Yeah, I absolutely recognise that. And I think something I'm very aware of is you don't know your personal resilience until it's really tested, do you? So
No, exactly. And most of us are never tested to our limits. Actually, I'm not. Have I been tested to my limits in this job? I don't know. I've never felt very, very, very uncomfortable in this job. I felt very, very, very uncomfortable when I was DCMO. But that was 15 plus years ago, and I think if I'd been chair of the college 15 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to cope with what I've had to cope with now. So it's probably not what you want to hear, but you get better and better as a leader, or you become more resilient and wiser, and more able to cope with stress as you get more experienced, I guess. So even though the department job was quite a tough job, it's helped me to do this job more effectively. So each time you do a job, you learn and get better.
yes, I think, I mean, that was one of your personal reflections earlier, wasn't it? That perhaps at that time you didn't have the right skill set or the right kind of thought process to interact in that kind of level. And now later down the line you are. Are there any sort of personal reflections that you do feel that you could share with us about how things have been inside the college in the last 12 months?
Yeah, so I think we recognised the scale of the crisis pretty early as a team, which was good. And we knew that it was going to be not a do or die, but a major challenge for the college. Can we respond to the needs of our members and the needs of our patients rapidly and efficiently? And the college is a wonderful place. There are times when it's not the quickest of places to make decisions or to get stuff out there. So that was going to be a big challenge for us because we knew we had to be. And it feels to me as if we responded to that. The guidance that we produced, the advice that we produced for members and for patients, the lobbying that we did in government in order to get things like PPE and other things sorted out, test and trace, role of general practice in vaccinations, all of that has been good. So I think the feeling within the college has been mostly one of pride. There have been times when any institution is a frustrating place to work. So there have been frustrations. I think it's been probably the biggest challenge, and the one where I do envy Helen, is running it. My responsibility as chair of the college is to support the officer team. There's 8 of us in the officer team, to then support the leadership team. There's 14 of us, including the officers and the executive directors in the college, and then to support the 54,000 members. So I've got a kind of 3 different teams, if you like, that I'm leading. And the officer team is probably, it's the most important, in some ways, team that I manage, because it's through the officers that we deliver what we need to deliver. And where I envy Helen is not being able to have face-to-face meetings with the officers, because being an officer is a really tough job. Actually, being chair is probably paradoxically almost the easiest job, because it's a full-time job. So I don't have any other distractions, whereas my colleagues, I was one of the vice chairs of Helen before we started, doing essentially a 3-session job, but taking 6 or 7 sessions to do it, because it's all encompassing, and having a practice to run and an academic unit to run and lots of other things as well. And the other officers are in that position. So it's a really tough job, and mutual support, that kind of friendship, the camaraderie that comes from doing a tough job together is brilliant. And part of the way we achieve that is regular face-to-face meetings, a meal once a week, drinks more often than that. We would in normal circumstances get together and support each other. And that network has been much more difficult to develop over Zoom. So we do meet once a week on Zoom, but if somebody's having a hard time, you don't pick it up so easily. If somebody's grumpy, you pick it up too easily. There's the kind of Zoom relationships are not natural relationships, and it's a hard environment to be a leader in, I think. So we're desperately looking forward to May or June or next year or whenever it will be.
I think there are a lot of networks that have felt that kind of the virtual platform is a reasonable substitute, but it's not as good as supporting each other in the flesh, definitely. Yeah. Well, Martin, the questions are absolutely piling up, so I do feel that I should go to the attendees who are here, because it's very important that they get to speak to you as well. What I'd ask people to do is I'm going to go down the questions just in order as they come up in the chat. So I'm going to say your name. It'd be really nice if you could come on video and unmute yourself, and firstly just tell Martin where you're from or what your stage is, because it's nice to be introduced to. So I'm going to go Sophie. I'm hoping that Sophie Rowlands is able to turn on her camera and talk to us. Sophie, you've got a question for Martin.
Yeah, I do. So my name's Sophie. I'm a First 5 GP in Surrey and Sussex, and I'm also on the RCGP Junior International Committee as well. And I wanted to know what's required to become chair of the RCGP. So is it a requirement to be an academic? And also, how thick a skin do you need to do the job?
Okay, the last one, very thick. No, actually, that's not true. You can be as sensitive as you like. But one of the bits of advice I got from a senior civil servant when I moved into the department, which I at the time I thought was sad, and I still think is sad, is don't bleed. And there's a really interesting question, because as GPs, we're kind of taught to bleed, aren't we? We're taught to show our emotions and understand people's emotions, share emotions. And I think there's a question about who you share your emotions with when you're a leader, and it needs to be safe people. And I'm not into the kind of macho heroic model of leadership, but there's something about who you share your weaknesses with and your dark moments with, which I think is important. And I think even people who seem to have quite thick skin actually don't have that thick skin and need support. So seeking people that you trust is really important. Having thick skin is really helpful, but it shouldn't be too thick, otherwise you won't do your job properly. So that's the easy bit. What was the first part of your question, sorry?
And the first part was what's required to become the chair?
Oh, to become chair, yeah. So anybody can become chair. I think probably if you look over the lifetime of the college, which is nearly 70 years now, probably more academics have done it. And that's mostly because it's easier to get your academic employer to give you time to contribute to the college than it is if you're a service GP, which I think is really sad. I don't think that's right, but I think that's the history. But there are lots of people who have their own practices, who will become officers, and there's some who've become chairs as well. What do you need? Well, you've got to have a passion for the college and a passion for professional organisations. I became a member of the college the first day I became a trainee in 1987, and I did so because I was introduced by my trainer, who was a really committed college person, and I discovered very quickly that the college is a place to meet people peers who share your values but think completely differently and have different opinions. And that environment, the environment that for me is one that allows you to grow professionally, is a really exciting one. So you've got to have that passion for the college and buy into its values. You probably do have to have some leadership experience. I think there's some people in the past, chairs, only a small number who've been appointed quite young in their careers, possibly without much leadership experience. And I think they've found it a tougher job than those who've taken it on a bit later in their careers. You've basically got to be either liked or admired or respected by your peers. The chair of the college is elected by council, and all of the officers, in fact, apart from the president, which is a ceremonial role in our college, are elected by council. The president is elected by the whole membership. So being elected by council, we've got a big council, about 70 people. You've got to probably they've got to know you, so it's not essential, but I think almost all chairs that I know have been an officer of some description prior to becoming chair. So I was vice chair for external affairs for Helen for 3 years, and that helps because people then know whether you've got a track record of delivery. They know whether you're trustworthy. They know whether they like your style or don't like your style. So you've got to be yourself. You can't pretend you're something else. But I guess you've got to you've got to have the respect of your peers, because council. I shouldn't say this because they might be wrong this time, but council generally makes a wise decision in terms of who they want to chair. They very rarely vote for the same kind of person back to back. So usually they vote for somebody slightly different. But they usually think very hard about who they want. And they will usually appoint people who they think are the right people for whatever that time might be. So I think those are all the things. When I was vice chair, I wasn't sure whether I was going to apply for chair. I wasn't sure it was the right role for me, so I watched Helen closely to see whether it was the kind of job that I wanted to do, I guess. But at the same time, I did what I think all leaders do, which is kind of prepare the ground just in case. So, I made sure that I wrote good papers for council. I made sure that I understood what the membership wanted and what council wanted. So I think being a thoughtful and planful person is very helpful as a leader. Some people are very intuitive and don't think that much about it, don't plan. But I think some of the most effective leaders are people who are actually very planful. They're thinking about what they need to do in order to be better. And I don't mean manipulative, I do mean planful in a positive kind of way. Does that help, Sophie?
Yeah, that was really, really great. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. I think it's really nice for us to hear how you get to the chair, and it's really important to know that it is elected. So a lot of your positions up to now have been employed, but you're elected by your peers and the college to be the chair.
So, it's essentially, well, I was elected into the vice chair role, but yes, I've only had 2 positions in my career that have been elected, and both of them in the college, and it's a very different environment from being appointed. Yeah.
And while we're on the college, we've got a question from Will. Will's got a question about PPE, and Will, can I go to you, please?
Thanks, Julia. Martin, it's been really great, really interesting to hear. And I do think that move from a sort of appointed academic positions to taking on an elected role feels really interesting, and it must have felt quite different to go through that process. I'd be interested to hear about that. But my question was around sort of within the college, how you preserve your influence as an individual and as an organisation. So when do you decide? There's outcry amongst general practitioners across the country last year about poor PPE, lack of PPE, insufficient PPE, amongst lots of other service pressures, excessive workload. And I sense that it might be easier for a union like the BMA to voice those much more upfront to the government or to NHS England rather than, versus the college. But I wondered what that felt like as to when you decide to sort of make a scene or exert your weight, if you like. Yeah,
so that's a really important question. I think you've put your finger on one of the biggest tensions that you have to hold as a leader of a professional organisation, which is on one side you're a membership organisation and you've been elected to represent your members. And on the other side, you're a professional leader who has a responsibility to take their members to places that they possibly don't want to go to, or maybe don't even recognise. And getting that right balance is really important. And I think we all achieve the balance in different ways. I think it's probably fair to say that Helen was a superb leader of the membership. She really had a finger on the pulse. She understood the members really well, and she saw herself as primarily a servant of the members, a servant of council. I'm probably with my academic background and my kind of propensity towards independence, I'm in a slightly different place in so much as I want to represent the members, of course, otherwise I wouldn't be doing the job. But actually, I want to take general practice in a certain direction, or I want to lead general practice into a place where it'll be more powerful, more influential, and a well-respected part of the health service. And that requires me to do things which sometimes I have to do cautiously and carefully, particularly in the current environment, which is quite a tough one, as I say. But take people with me, and sometimes accept that the members won't like what I do or what I say. So PPE is a kind of an example. I mean, I think the PPE issues in general practice were less difficult than they were in the hospital sector, but they were real. And we did negotiate hard to understand what the right kind of PPE is for the kind of work that we do in general practice. if I had a guiding principle, it was the importance of a collective medical voice. So we worked very closely across all of the medical royal colleges. So we didn't want to, at any stage during the crisis to be seen to be divided. And we worked very closely with the CMOs in the 4 countries and with the medical director of the NHS and with the respected independent regulators like JCVI, for example, or MHRA. So that was a guiding principle. Now, there were times when, you had to kind of push your own furrow, whatever the expression is, plow your own furrow. There were times when you might challenge CMO privately, at least, but not publicly, because you didn't believe that things were going in the right direction. But most of the time, I've got a lot of respect for Chris Whitty. I've got a lot of respect for Steve Paris. I think most of the time the decisions they made have been proved to be correct. And I think it's a good thing that we've held together as a medical profession. Now, not the whole of the medical profession is in that place, and I don't want to give the BMA a hard time here, but the BMA has got a different function. It's a union function rather than the professional leadership, quality and standards function, which is what we've got. And there are times when the BMA has been in quite a different place from the medical royal colleges. But I've just felt that loyalty and cohesion at a time of crisis was really important. Now, outside crisis, that might be completely different. There are times when we as a Royal College of General Practitioners are in quite a different place from the specialist medical Royal Colleges. And sometimes publicly, that comes out publicly. But during a crisis, it's a really good principle that you hold your lines, because otherwise things become really very difficult.
I think that's a really good insight to the fact that leadership has to adapt, and you have been leading in a crisis, as you say, the worst crisis in 70 years in health. So it's really interesting. Thank you for sharing those reflections and the learning that you've had around that, Martin. The questions just keep coming, so we're going to change tack now and go back towards academia. Abhay Sheikh, are you there? It looks like you're a GPST1 from Bolton. Can you hear us? You happy to ask Martin his question?
Hi Martin, you okay?
Hi, good to see you.
Thanks for joining us. So I've got a question with regard to the fellowship that you did, which for you was quite a pivotal time in your professional career. So as opportunities present themselves for us, did you have in mind what you would do with the fellowship or where it would take you? Or was it more of a natural step or something that you were just interested in and you thought, why the hell not?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all of those, actually. I was definitely at the crossroads in my career, and I described the tension that I had of wanting to carry on being mostly a GP in a partnership, which is a really happy partnership in a lovely part of the country with lovely patients, a really well established together practice, quite a high earning practice. My wife and I loved living in Devon. So there are lots of things about my life there that were just great. But I am quite a restless soul. And I do like variety and I like steep learning curves. And I think that's what led me to say, okay, I am willing to risk giving up all of this for the sake of doing something different. I'm willing to take that risk. What I wasn't clear about is how to make that step from being a GP in Devon to being a professor of general practice in Manchester in one of the world leading centres. And the fellowship in the States helped me to make that. It basically broadened my horizons. I had the horizons of a GP in Devon, which are wonderful horizons, but they're quite narrow ones. And if I'd moved to Manchester with those horizons, I think I would have struggled. Whereas going to the States, living in a completely different country, completely different culture, exposed to some of the brightest people in the world in my field of policy-related quality of care, I guess interacting with people who think very differently, all of that just basically broadened my horizons, gave me a different outlook on life, and certainly encouraged me to take more risks later in my career. So I think that helped a lot. there's something about the transition between jobs, which can be quite difficult, but it's good to think about how best you manage them and how best you prepare yourself for them.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Martin. That's I love the way we've got lots of different trains of thought at the same time going on here. I'm going to keep going through the questions. We've got Lizzie next, who's got a question about health improvement. Lizzie, are you there?
Yeah, hi Martin, thanks for giving up your time this evening. So I'm a GPST3 and clinical leadership fellow with the Improvement Academy up in Yorkshire. And my question is kind of wider than the role of the GP, but about the role of the clinician in health service improvement. We've seen in COVID, responsibility and autonomy was given back to clinicians in making changes to services. What do you see the role of clinicians in health service improvement going forward?
Yeah, okay. So a fundamental one, but I come at it from a slightly strange angle, because although I'm kind of perceived to be an expert in quality improvement, I'm an expert in evaluating quality improvement. I'm a hopefully constructive critic of quality improvement. So it's a slightly unusual position to be in. So am I an experienced improver myself? Not really. I've done quite a few improvement projects. I've taught a lot of people about improvement, but I'm nowhere like as experienced improver as many of my colleagues. So my interest is why do people engage with improvement? How do you do improvement? How do you know whether improvement is achieving aims? How do you know whether the almost evangelistic environment that you get into when you're in the improvement world is justified? So those are all the questions that I was kind of coming from as a researcher, as an evaluator of improvement. So at the end of 20 years of doing research in that field, I've got no doubt at all that an improvement philosophy is a really positive and important philosophy to have. And I've got no doubt at all that there aren't enough clinicians who've got it. I think it's quite a countercultural philosophy in the environment that we operate in, which is a very performance managed environment. So I think clinicians have a responsibility to create a much more conducive kind of learning environment that you get. I think we have a responsibility to be much more data driven than we are at the moment. So I think clinicians have a really, really important role. I suppose if I'm critical, it's still that when I look at the most impressive improvement orientated organizations anywhere in the world, I still reckon that if you spoke to 80 or 90% of their staff, they wouldn't get it. So there's something about a small number of leaders who really buy into improvement that manage to kind of drive an organization. And I'm really interested in that threshold. What would it take for everybody in an organization, all the health and care professionals, all the managers, to understand and utilize improvement? And what would an organization look like if you did that? There are a small number of organizations that have done it. I think Young Shipping in Sweden has done so. I think Intermountain Healthcare in the States has done so. But it is really difficult territory. And I'm not sure I can really name anywhere in the UK, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, Lizzie, but anywhere in the UK that I would regard as a concentrated improvement organisation that really gets it. And maybe that's the environment that we operate in. Very difficult to be in improvement organisations when you're operating, when you're working with NHS England, with respect, that doesn't have an improvement philosophy. Or indeed NHS Improvement that doesn't have an improvement philosophy either.
That would be my experience so far. Thank you very much for answering that, Martin.
Thank you, Martin. I think we could talk about that a little bit more, but we've got so many questions, so I'll move on. We've got Shayla, who's going to ask a question. We're going back to college now as well. Shayla, can you hear us?
Hi, yes, it's Shayla Imtiaz-Umar. Hi. I'm a GP partner in Derby. I'm a first 5 CCT'd approximately 18 months ago. My question really is just the recent press coverage regarding GPs. It feels like it's a constant onslaught, bad press for GPs. So is there anything being done from the college in order to turn the tide? My perception has been that it inevitably causes friction with patients and their perceptions of our lack of opening during the first wave of the pandemic, and then secondary care delays were inevitably being borne the brunt by primary care physicians. So what can we do to try and turn the tide?
Yeah, okay. So I might challenge your starting position here, but let me have a go at doing it. I mean, I think you're absolutely right that general practice does get a lot of stick. It always has in some ways. You know, I think it's really interesting that if you're a neurosurgeon, no one doubts what you do. No one doubts that you do a good job. But there's something about the nature of general practice that everybody feels like they're an expert in it, and everybody has a view on it, and everybody feels that they can differentiate between what they see as a good and a bad doctor. So I think if you don't like criticism, you don't like operating in that environment, probably don't become a GP is my advice to medical students, because you'll never be a hero. Or actually, no, most of the time you won't be a hero. That's the nature of generalist practice. I have been quoted on a number of occasions of saying that general practice currently has an undoable job, and I think it is. And that's one of our big challenges as a leadership organisation. And, you know, I go back to the start of my career where a busy day was 20, maybe 25 patients. And now a busy day is 60 or 70 patients. A normal working day when I started as a partner would be a less than 2 hour surgery in the morning and an hour and a half surgery in the afternoon, more home visits and occasional clinics in the afternoon, but literally we had 2 or 3 hours off in the middle of the day to do whatever you fancied doing. We did a 1 in 4, 1 in 5 out of hours rota, but even that was pretty light. So that was the nature of general practice that I joined. 30 years later, look at what general practice is. It's a really tough job to do well. And I don't think there's any way that we as experienced clinicians can deliver the quality of care that we're trained to deliver in the current environment. And that's what makes me passionate about it, because general practice is such an important medical specialty. It's such an important job that we do, that we have to correct that position that we're in at the moment. And that's what we're trying to do as a college. And maybe Julia will come back to future questions about how we're doing that. My perception is that general practice went through a particularly bad time last spring and early summer because of us changing the model of the way that we work. You know, we shifted from 85% face-to-face to 10% face-to-face in a period of weeks. And we did that because we had to, for infection control reasons, but we didn't have time to involve our patients in that change or to explain to the patients why we were making it. And inevitably, patients were grumpy. And indeed, some GPs were pretty grumpy about it as well. And you kind of understand that. And at the same time as that, patients stayed away from general practice. We went through a period where our workload was down by 25%. And it was a really strange period because for some GPs, for the first time in their lives, it felt like they were doing a doable job with 25% less work. But it didn't feel that good because we knew there were sick patients that weren't coming to see us because they thought general practice was shut, or they didn't want to pick up an infection, or they didn't want to bother the NHS. So I think there was a period where we came in for criticisms because we weren't perceived by patients and therefore by politicians who are responsive to the patients, their constituents, to be doing our job. And we had to really push hard and defend general practice, which we did repeatedly in the media, as well as behind closed doors in our policy discussions with Secretary of State and others. And that was a tough period. Now, the reason I might disagree with you, because I think actually general practice is the golden child at the moment. I think the way that we are respected for what we've done around the vaccination programme, the way that in addition to all the work that we've done, we've taken on the biggest vaccination programme ever, alongside the flu vaccination programme, alongside all the COVID related work and as much business as usual as we're able to do. And we've delivered it. 75% of the 20 million vaccinations that have been delivered in the UK's programme have been delivered by general practice. Now that is the most incredible achievement, and patients realise that, and patients understand that, and even politicians are praising us repeatedly, actually, for it. So I think part of the problem is we don't hear praise when we receive it because we're so unused to it. We don't actually hear it. But there are a lot of people praising general practice at the moment, and one of our jobs as a college is to make sure that that's remembered, to make sure that we squeeze every bit of asset that we can out of the praise that we're getting, and use it as an opportunity to demonstrate how good general practice is and what general practice does. But I'm not pretending for a second that general practice is in a good place at the moment, because it isn't, and it's going to take some time before we get back to something which allows us to do the job, look after our patients with the kind of quality that we were trained to deliver.
I agree. Thank you so much for your reflection through your career. Obviously, it's been a kind of persistent trend throughout. And I appreciate you clarifying what the college standpoint has been. And I agree. I think the primary care has done a phenomenal job with the vaccination programmes. It's just about holding on to that goodwill, hopefully from the public and the politicians, and move it forward. Thank you.
Well, we won't let anybody forget, I can assure you. Neither must everybody on the ground. It's really important.
Good. Thank you.
Oh, that was a great question. And I think in some ways it kind of pulls us towards another area that we haven't actually explored. And I've had a couple of messages asking to ask you about this. And I saw what you said back in February at the last conference, Martin, about relationship medicine and the importance of it. And it's absolutely key to everything that I do. My small rural practice is very close to your first experience of general practice in Wiltshire. And I feel that relationship medicine is key to general practice. And you talked about this idea that general practice has a risk of becoming transactional, and maybe the pandemic has for some of us has opened up huge doors in terms of working remotely, juggling different roles, juggling family and caring. But I just wondered if you could give us a feel of your landscape ahead. What does general practice look like for you? The threats at the moment, but also as we progress through our careers, what you see the opportunities are, Martin.
Yeah, okay. So let me have a go at explaining what I think general practice might evolve into, what it might look like in 10 or 20 years' time. And it will be a process of evolution. It's not going to be a sudden change. So I think one of the biggest challenges for us in general practice is that we're still working to an old model. We're still trying to be all things to all people. And that's kind of understandable. And actually, it's probably quite cost effective. It's remarkable what GPs can do and do really quickly. If I see somebody with a sore throat, I could deal with it in a minute and then turn on to the other problems that people present. If that person with a sore throat is sent to our physician associate, they spend 15 minutes dealing with it. So I'm not saying that general practice doesn't do a brilliant job by being generalists, but I'm saying that for as long as there aren't enough GPs around, we've got to be more focused about where we add value to patient care, and that requires us to be quite strategic and quite tactical. So if I look at GPs, if I look at the training that we have and the experience that we gain as GPs, as expert medical generalists, there's three things that we do really well. So one of them is triage, making quick decisions. We're very good at managing risk, managing uncertainty, making quick decisions, making sure that people get to the right place. So that's one thing that we do. The second thing we do, which I think is probably the most important, is we're good old-fashioned general physicians. We're good at managing complexity, using our relationships with patients in order to get to the bottom of complex, multi-morbid, biopsychosocial problems. So that's the kind of second area. You cannot practice that medicine in 10 minutes. For 60 patients a day, and that's the kind of issue. So that's the second area. And then the third area is what I'm calling community health improvement function. You could call public health, you could call population health. It's essentially our understanding of our local communities, and the trust that we have in our local communities allows us to get much more involved in improving the health of the community, not just the health of the individual patient sitting in front of us. So there's so many examples of practices making a real difference to health inequalities, to addressing social determinants of health, to using social interventions, to building on community assets, to working with their local government, with their local schools, with their local employers. There's so many patchy, but there's so many really good examples of practices doing that. At a time when the traditional public health function has been largely denuded by lack of funding. So I think that general practitioners can and should play a really important role. And I tell a story of a patient who's a real patient, but anonymous. Call him Mohammed. He's a guy who was from Iraq, a refugee, came to the UK living in Newham with his wife and two young kids. He was obese and he had type 2 diabetes, as nearly 15% of our population do in Newham. And I spent the first year that I looked after him, he used to come and see me every time. First year I looked after him, basically playing around with his medication, not really understanding what was going on, having no impact whatsoever on his diabetic control. And then after about a year, he started probably trusting me and he started opening up to me. And I found out things that just gave me new insights into why his diabetes was so poor to control. So we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with 17 other people, he and his wife and 2 kids and 17 other people. They had 4 beds and they used to hot bed. So they'd have 4 hours in bed and then 8 hours out of bed. They had no kitchen. So he and his family ate all their meals in the local fried chicken shops, of which there are many in Newham. And he loved it. He loved the food. It was very tasty. It cost him about £4.50 to have 2 big filling meals a day. And he liked the fried chicken shop because that's where he got a bit of peace and quiet and met his mates. So he was living in this kind of non-salutogenic environment, if that's the right word, a very unhealthy environment, but he was content with it. Now, one of the good things about working in a city community like Newham is we have a good relationship with our local council, and we have access, not as good as it was actually, but access to a lot of social prescribing schemes. And over a period of about 3 or 4 years, working with our local council, working with colleagues within our own team, we managed to get him a job. We managed to get him rehoused with his family, sent him on an exercise on prescription scheme, which was brilliant because in Newham, the exercise is done in the Olympic copper box and the Olympic pool and the Olympic cycling arena, and then sent him on a cooking course with his wife, cooking on prescription course. And all of those things, I'm not going to pretend that Mohammed is suddenly a new man, but all of those things over a period of years have changed his life. And he's in a much better place. He's lost weight. He's got a job. He's more proud. He can look after his family and his kids. Still goes to the fried chicken shop a bit, but not as much as he used to. He eats much better and his diabetes is much better controlled. That's taken a long period of time, but it's an example of how using social interventions and understanding patients is really important. And most importantly, Mohammed said to me afterwards, only about a year ago, I've been looking after him for about 7 years now, he said, I wouldn't have done any of those stupid things that you asked me to do if I hadn't trusted you, Dr. Marshall. So, if we had and I don't mean to be rude to anybody here, but if we had a 19-year-old social prescriber, I don't think that Mohammed would have trusted that individual. I don't think that he would have turned up at the cooking class or the exercise class or engaged with the job club or anything like that. So there's something about the trust that we have from our patients that allows us to be influential. And that to me is essentially the public health role. It's an understanding of your community, the assets that exist in your community and your ability to use that in a way that moves beyond the individual patient that's in front of you. So I think, going back to the original question, those 3 functions are what we do really well. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in the middle, which is relatively transactional and actually can safely be treated as relatively transactional and can be dealt with by other members of the enlarged primary care team that we are members of. So that to me would allow GPs to redesign their job completely, to see a smaller number of patients for a longer period of time, to do both rapid triage stuff and complex stuff. And you could get the right balance between those two depending on what your interests are. So for me, I'd like to spend probably 60% of my time doing complex stuff, probably 10% of my time doing triage, and the rest of my time doing community health improvement work. That would be a good job for me. But there are others that love triage and would spend 100% of the time doing triage. That's fine. It doesn't really matter as long as you're doing a GP's job. And that, I think, is the right model for the future. So we will have larger practices, or at least networks of practices, because they allow us to do the community health improvement work more effectively, and they allow you to build an infrastructure which allows general practice to do different things that hospitals can do and general practice can't do because the scale is too small. And we'll operate in different ways. We'll provide a different kind of clinical role to the one we're delivering at the moment. So that's my model. Might be wrong, but I think it's probably a deliverable model, it seems to me.
Well, I think what my reflection on that story that you've shared from the patient is that's a huge team effort, isn't it? As potentially your relationship with him was built on by all the bits that were added on by the different people. So we work as a team, don't we? And at the end of the day, if we can help our patients make a relationship with whoever they trust, it doesn't necessarily have to be the doctor. It can be any member of the team. And that's what's so lovely about that story, that he came back to you and said, I trusted you, so I did it. That's the importance in that. So so I'm hearing there are challenges, but we as the next generation can, to some extent define what we want to do, but also kind of use that as opportunities to help our community. I love that idea as patients as individuals, but also patients as communities as well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think as a leader, you know, I don't think you have to have an absolutely clear vision in your mind, but you've got to have a set of principles that guide you. You've got to have an unhappiness with the present. And I think we have every reason to be unhappy with the present, because that then drives you to do things differently. And you've got to have a set of principles that drive you in a certain direction. And you know, my vision of where general practice could be, I don't think it's a perfect vision, but I think it is a doable vision. Is one that I've developed over a 40-year career. So if anybody's got a vision right now at your stage of your career, that's great. But I guess it will evolve over time.
Yeah, I see that. And this kind of feeds into a question that Erin has asked, which is about when you become a GP, you already have 5 or 6 years within the NHS. And do you think that working clinically is key to be able to lead in primary care? Or do you feel those that have left clinical practice can still lead and be part of the infrastructure? It may be in other roles, leading in CCGs or in the Royal College or PCNs. That was Erin's question about kind of blending leadership and clinical work.
Yeah, so I mean, my personal view is being a clinician is a really important part of our credibility and our effectiveness as leaders. Now, that doesn't mean you have to be that way. And I've got a lot of colleagues who gave up medicine, you know, when they were a SHO or whatever, or you know, a F2, and then went into leadership roles. I've got quite a few colleagues like that. But for me, my added value, my justification for being a leader is being a clinician. And even though, as I say, for 20 years, I've done no more than a day a week, the bizarre thing is if I'm on holiday, in the old days when we used to have holidays abroad, and you'd meet somebody at a bar and they say, what do you do? I'd always say I'm a GP. I'd never say I was an academic or a policymaker or anything like that, because in my heart, being a clinician is what is really is what is really important to me and what kind of drives me. So I think clinical experience is really important. Where I might be challenging to some of you is, I said earlier that I spent the first 10 or 12 years of my career being mostly a clinician and basically learning the ropes, developing that kind of clinical wisdom, the understanding of the human condition, which has then allowed me to be a clinician pretty part-time for a long period of time, but hopefully still a safe one, so with all my fingers crossed, and hopefully a reasonably good one. I'm not as good as I would be if I was doing more clinical practice, because it does require experience and practice, but you know, hopefully I'm okay. What I worry about with some of my mentees is that they give up clinical practice or reduce their clinical practice at a very early stage in their career, and therefore have no foundation on which to build other things. So my advice to people, and you know, this might, as you say, some of you might not like it because you might have decided to do otherwise, but my advice to people is never do less than half-time clinical practice for the first decade or so of your life.
That's interesting. I think that is, I mean, that's something certainly I've heard from people, but we've heard in some evenings the people who are able to balance and develop in different ways. So I think we have the opportunity. Yeah. I want to change tack again because Suman's asked a really important question, and this is on ethnicity. Suman, are you there?
I'm there, sorry. Thank you. Can you see me? I don't know.
Yes, hi, Suman.
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Professor, for joining us this evening and enlightening us. Sorry to ask this question. I don't know if it's irrelevant or relevant, but apologies if it is. You've been an inspiration to us, and so is RCGP, great body with a legacy. My question is about BAME. Correct me if I'm wrong with my figures, but I have heard approximately around 40% of GPs in the college are from BAME background, while only a fractional representation of such members are on trustee level or decision-making board level, even in 2021. I was wondering whether you could give us some suggestions how the BAME colleagues can cross that barrier to go to a higher board level. I mean, how can they achieve, and what should they do to achieve that level? Is there anything we are lacking, or that sort of question?
So I think you've put your finger, Suman, on probably one of my biggest challenges. I think what matters as a leader is about your skill set, but you create an impression by what you are and who you are. And in the current environment, for me, as a white, male, middle-aged bloke, I don't represent general practice. General practice, a large part of general practice is young and female. Large part is from BAME backgrounds. So it's a really interesting challenge for me as a leader to understand and reflect the nature of the specialty that I'm in, without actually being part of it. And that's a big challenge. And I haven't always got that right, for sure. I could give you a practical example of that maybe. As a college, we have been challenged quite significantly, as all Royal Colleges and actually all institutions are challenged at the moment, rightly so, about our diversity. Our council is very diverse. As I say, we've got about 70 members of council. The figure that I've seen is about 30% of our workforce in general practice are from BAME backgrounds, and somewhere between 35 and 40% of our council is from BAME backgrounds. So we're pretty much representative on council, which is good. Where we're not representative is in the officer team at the moment. We have 2 women, and the rest of us are men. In fact, 2 of our members are from minority ethnic backgrounds, but you wouldn't believe that if you look at us. So if you see a picture of us, it looks like a bunch of white people, and it looks like mostly a bunch of white men. So that's been an issue in terms of the way that we're perceived as a team. Now, as we were just discussing earlier, we're elected. And so council decide what they want and elect us, and they tend to elect us on what our experiences and our potential as leaders are, rather than anything else. Having said that, I think it would be very helpful, and I think it'd be a good thing if council decided to elect a more diverse officer group next time. That requires people to be encouraged to put their names forward, to be supported, to develop their leadership skills in the same way as anybody would be, to have the courage to stand up and go for election and potentially be rejected, as all of us have had experiences of that. But I think it's really important. And I would hope that the next set of officers will be more diverse than the current set of officers, because I think that's good for general practice. The other part of college is our trustee board, which is our kind of governance group within the college, and that is the least diverse part, or has until very recently been the least diverse part of the college. So I think we've been the target of criticism, and I think kind of justifiably so as well. And one of our jobs as leaders now is to support our BAME colleagues so that they can, become us next time round or at some stage in the future. And that's an important role I think we have at the moment. Have I answered your question, Stephen?
Yeah, thank you, Professor. Yeah, thank you. I think the feeling I'm getting from BAME community is that they want to make an even playground where I don't think we can go ahead without our white allies hand in hand, so that the college progresses through. And some feels that they are not represented doesn't mean that they have to go above EU levels. So I think they need a representation there to voice their concern. At least they are heard. I think they want an even playground there. I think that's what the feeling I'm getting at.
Yeah, well, I think we're developing that. We're on a journey. We've still got a way to go. We've got a very good EDI, quality, diversity and inclusion strategy now. We've got a very active BAME group in the college. The last set of national elections for college roles, 6 people are elected every year. All 6 were females. All 6 were BAME. So that says something about councils and the membership's desire to have a more diverse college than perhaps we've been in the past. So I think that's a challenge. Actually, I mentioned that I'd made mistakes. One mistake that I made, which I'm learning, but it was specifically over the Black Lives Matter issue and the issues around that. And when that story broke, I led the college response, which was I essentially framed the Black Lives Matter as an issue of social justice and inequalities. And I thought that was a sensible way to go and a thoughtful way to go. I was kind of moving it from the emotion of what had happened, the murder and such like. But I got an awful lot of stick for that, an awful lot of criticism. from members and from others that I didn't understand the issues, particularly from a Black perspective, and that I hadn't been sufficiently empathetic or understanding of some of the issues and the depth of the social injustice and the depth of the emotion that existed. And I've learned, I guess, as we all learn.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Martin, I think that's one of the greatest reflections that we can give people tonight, is that you can make mistakes and we unwittingly make mistakes, but it's okay as long as we learn from them. And obviously, if we're open, it's very powerful to hear you say that as well, because it feels like it genuinely came from a right place, and if to be criticized for that must have felt a little bit difficult to take at times.
Yeah, it was. I mean, not least because I couldn't empathize with the depth of feeling that was out there. I can listen and I can learn and I can feel with other people, but I'm not part of the environment of often generations of injustice, and not being part of that is and not being able to express it was difficult. It was a real challenge.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And we know one of our own next geners, we've got Sonali who sits on council now, so I know that she's pushing this forward for us as well, which is it's brilliant. A diverse council and like diverse officers will help. General practice is a very diverse place now, isn't it? And I know here in Wessex, we've recently through HEE appointed some inclusion and diversity fellows as well. So there's that idea that younger GPs are getting involved with it at the very beginning of their career as well. So I feel a lot of hope for it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we and certainly we're one of the most active colleges in this area. So it's a challenge that we recognise and we're rising to.
Yeah. Now
actually, you might have seen that we had our last council on Friday, and a motion was brought by Sonali, Margaret Ickbo, around CQC, whether CQC was doing enough to recognise the challenges of practices working in ethnically diverse areas and led by BAME colleagues. And that motion was passed almost unanimously. And we're now working with CQC to understand what to do. So I think there's a range of areas in which we as a college are taking a lead and trying to make a difference, trying to create a better society. But it'll be a slow journey.
And it also shows even next geners at the beginning of our career, we can make a difference as well, because we can hear and see the action of Sonali doing that, and that's pretty powerful to hear that. Going to start a really good conversation with CQC about supporting people who work in diverse areas as well. I'm aware we've got just a few minutes left, and I've just got so much learning to kind of distill down. And I wondered, I'm so sorry to everyone that I haven't got to your questions. We will perhaps be able to put them to Martin and put them in the next newsletter. But Martin, I wanted to kind of think back to the people who are listening now, and these early career GPs, maybe trainees. What sort of 3 tips could you give them about making leadership choices in the coming years, and what they could do to help themselves? What would you say?
Okay, 3 tips. Be planful is my number 1 tip. So think about what you do. Think about how you can improve your leadership skills. Expose yourself to new opportunities. Be constantly holding up a mirror to yourself, and learn to live with failures that we all have, and learn from them and move on. So be planful, I think, is number 1. And as I said earlier, I think some of the leaders that I most respect are people who are very calculating, and I mean that in a positive way. They're really very thoughtful about what they do and how they do it. They come across as natural leaders who don't have to think twice about what they're doing, but actually they're not. They carry a little book around with them and they make notes all the time, and they're learning constantly. So I think be planful is 1. Take risks. You wouldn't be surprised to hear me say that, would be another. So you learn by pushing yourself. As I've described, I was probably beyond my capabilities when I was in the department 15 years ago. But most of us don't push ourselves up to or beyond our capabilities. Most of us have no idea where the limits of our skills lie. And I think it's something about taking risks and pushing yourself so you can find out and learn from it. And it can be really uncomfortable, but learn from it. So I think that's the second area. The third area is probably find a mentor, or a number of different mentors. I've had some really, really good mentors. I've still got some really, really good mentors in my career who've kind of taken me under their wing and supported me, challenged me when it was needed, shouted at me when it was needed, supported me a lot of the time. Really, really good people. It's only a handful of people, some GPs, some non-GPs, but they've been really important. And I think it's probably fair to say, particularly in the hospital sector, possibly less so in general practice, it's quite difficult to find mentors at the moment, because senior, the kind of people that you might want to be your mentor, people are so busy, they don't have the time to give to people to help them in their career, which I think is a sad reflection on the medical profession, because if the medical profession is anything, it's an apprenticeship. You learn at the feet of your seniors, your experienced people, and you learn with them and from them. And I think it's really important that you should be mentors to medical students and more junior colleagues, learning from your experiences. And I've got a significant responsibility more and more as I get older to mentor other people and help them. So I think those would probably be my top three.
I really, really like those, and Will's really carefully put them in the chat for us. Thanks, Will. And find a mentor is something that comes up again and again and again in the Next Generation GP webinars, and certainly we have our local events, we talk about it as well, and the power of coaching. And there's free coaching for NHS staff at the moment that people can access. Any last tips on finding mentors, or where we could go looking for people who are busy but able, have capacity?
Well, it's a timely question, because the college has just started a mentorship scheme. I don't know whether you've seen about it. just a couple of weeks ago, a matching scheme. Go onto the college website and you'll find it. Put in your characteristics, put what you want to learn, what you want to get out of it, and mentors are signing up as well as mentees, and you'll be matched. I've signed up as a mentor, and in fact I've got my first mentee already, started straight away. So I think that that's one way of doing it, of finding somebody. And sometimes you'll click and sometimes you won't. I found them just by, they found me actually more than I found them. Sometimes you have to be a little bit persistent without being too irritating.
Yeah. And that goes back to the take risks, be courageous reflection that you've had. And there's some lovely.
I think be explicit. I think most people will rise to the challenge if you say, actually, I'm ambitious. I want to be a leader. I want to make a change in the health service, in the environment that I work in. Most people would find it very difficult to say, no, I haven't got time to look after you.
Yeah, and we've got so lovely, thanks everyone for your comments. We've got people saying, Suman says the LMC's got a mentoring scheme in his area. Lauren says, my sister who doesn't work in the NHS challenged me on the people are too busy idea. Often we assume people are busy, but actually if they ask you, find time. And that's been my experience actually as well, is and I think you're right with the right question, Martin, putting it forward. Fantastic to hear about the college mentoring as well. We'll put some links in the chat for people asking about where to get them from. Will and I can do that. Martin, this brings me to the end of our conversation. Our 90 minutes are up, and I can't thank you enough for your time this evening and your ability to answer questions on so many versatile subjects. Really, what we do in Next Gen is learn from people who are in front of us, who share their wisdom and their advice exactly as we've ended on that thought of a mentor. I think my reflections are general practice has had a hard time in the last 12 months, but actually each and one of us, everyone sat here has been part of the positivity of delivering, whether it's vaccination or remote consultations. There's been so much that's been so powerful, and I think we should give ourselves a pat on the back and continue to learn as we look forward to the challenges that the landscape of general practice will bring. thank you so much for your time this evening, Martin. I also want to thank all of the attendees who've given up their evening this evening to listen to us have this conversation. Some lovely things coming up in the chat saying inspirational, and thank you to you, Martin. One of the gifts of the Next Generation GP programme is that we always want feedback, because we need to make this relevant to those of you out there listening. So Will's going to put the link to some feedback in there. We also want to stay connected. As Martin says, it's incredibly difficult because we're not doing this in person with something to eat or drink. It's more important that we keep in touch with everyone, and we've got the newsletter that comes out. We've got some fantastic podcasts with amazing leaders, which make fantastic listening when you're on your daily walk or your run or on your way to work. I found them just inspirational, so do look for those, guys. I'm going to pull the evening to an end. Martin, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation, and good luck to everybody. You're in for a ball. Have a good time. Enjoy it.
Exactly. And I do hope you get around some of the college, some of the areas, and do a bit of travelling in the next 18 months of your time as chair. But I'll end the evening there and the recording, and then the rest of us will say goodbye.
Brilliant. Good luck.